Welcome to IB Unplugged, a Cognity podcast for IBDP educators that tackles your submitted questions and challenges by connecting you with experts and peers who share their ideas and stories from real classrooms.
Hello and welcome to IB Unplugged. I'm John Patton.
And I'm Courtney Marlene.
And today we had the pleasure of getting to speak with Jen Olmsted. Jen is the former head of school at the Singapore School in Jakarta, Indonesia, and principal at ICS Paris. She has over 30 years experience as a school leader and teacher. She has led both teacher and leadership workshops and is committed to developing educators to reach their greatest potential and foster a positive school culture. Jen has worked in a range of international schools from Hong Kong to Switzerland and appreciates diverse school communities. And the conversation with Jen was incredible. What you're about to hear is really quite useful, regardless of where you might sit within your school structure. If you're a school leader, there's a lot in this for you. If you're a teacher in your school, there's a whole lot here for you as well. Plenty to take away.
Yeah, I think that with Jen, we really appreciated that she was talking about the Enquiry Upon Results. Of course, that's the topic of this episode, but she really dove into not just the idea of what this does for the students, but really how this can be a professional learning opportunity. And she really talked about how these are so powerful for her teams to be able to improve their teaching for the next year and really be able to use those results to improve and kind of work as a group and work as a community in the teachers and really help each other get better.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I was actually kind of surprised because, we started talking about like leadership and I was like, oh, there's so many different ways we can talk about leadership in schools. And, Jen really focused on the Enquiry Upon Results process that you use with the IB and specifically results coming in. And as an IBDP coordinator myself, sometimes I found those EURs to not be so helpful. Sometimes you just get like a blank set of results or sometimes just tick marks. And so for me, it was really enlightening to speak with her and find out like, here's a specific strategy for how you can use this, shifting that teacher mindset of like, I'm going to be a learner now and understand more about my results, how my students did, and how I can actually enact positive change in the classroom, ultimately leading to better results, ultimately leading to better skill development. So it was really very useful to talk with her and see like there's some key strategies we can be implementing right away.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that she gave a lot of really nice ways to get started with that, a few ideas of how to change things both as a teacher and a leader. So yeah, I hope you're going to enjoy this episode because I definitely did.
On with the show. Hello, Jen. Welcome to the show.
Hi, it's great to be here.
We're so glad you're here. As I've said, I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while and really glad we're going to get into all sorts of stuff, leadership related, talking about the IBDP, talking about how we can use EURs to improve our practice. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation quite a bit. We like to start off each of our episodes with a couple of warm-up questions. Don't feel like you have to give us the full Monty of the answer here, but rather just kind of a brief synopsis, if you will. So the first question, why education?
And I think we're so lucky as educators, and I'm sure you feel the same way, John, because we get to shape students. We get to define our future. We get to shape what our students think and about what they're going to do, what they're going to achieve. And it's a really powerful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite a bit of responsibility there too.
And how do you see the role of the educators really evolving in the next decade?
I think that's such an interesting question. And I think we got a little bit of a taste of the future with COVID. And I remember with COVID, all of a sudden we're all grappling. We all had to teach remotely. And all of a sudden we're using all of these new technologies and new teaching strategies. And it was really hard. And I think one of the things that came out about that is how important a school community is. Being in the classroom, being with students, being with kids. I think COVID proved we're not going to be replaced by robots very soon. And I think the future of education is going to be about how we use technology. It can't replace what we're doing. It's got to transform. It's got to enhance what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think that technology that's very interactive, I think that's got to be our future.
Nice. So kind of learning how we can still maintain that role of the mentor in the classroom and be, that really close relationship with the students, but also kind of moving forward with the times and recognizing the tools that we have access to.
Absolutely.
So if I understand it correctly, you've built up a massive, really great career basically, and especially within leadership itself. Now as a school principal, am I assuming correctly that you're no longer in the classroom as a school principal?
I miss it very much.
I know, right? So I guess what would be some of the key things you really miss about being in the classroom?
What I really miss is actually knowing what is going on in a school, because the core business of a school is actually teaching and learning, and that's
Right.
what teachers do. So teachers are actually the experts of what's happening in the school.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that is really, really important. And I try as often as I can to take a lesson. If the economics teacher is away, for instance, I'm in there, just to keep in touch with actually what's going on. I think sometimes as school administrators, we get a little bit separated from the reality of what's happening in classrooms, and teachers are the experts essentially in a school.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting to hear you say that, because I think oftentimes teachers might say like, oh, I don't really have a lot of control of what happens here in the school, right? Feel like I've got control over my classroom and I'm right here, but it feels like the bigger decisions and that sort of stuff are kind of outside of my control. So it's interesting to hear like yourself as a school leader saying, well, so much of this is like right in the classroom. So what I take from that is like, we are all the school. And I think so often you'll hear people talk about it like it's some separate thing, like, well, the school needs to make better decisions about this. But as soon as we kind of embrace the idea that we make better decisions about this sort of stuff, I am an owner of this as well, then that can really make some more positive change. Because as you say, like we're all part of it, right?
And I think the best school decisions are made with teacher input. Absolutely. Because otherwise we don't necessarily see the consequences of what we're going to do. And I'm going to give an example. So I had this great idea. I want to introduce cognitive coaching. I got a committee together. This is cognitive coaching. What do you think? And this teacher said to me, I love it. It's a great idea, but we are in the middle of an MYP accreditation. We are grappling with personal projects, interdisciplinary projects, the personal project, you name it. They were grappling with it, writing planners, teaching through Enquiry, this huge change. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, I'm crazy. What am I doing? This is not a good time. It's not going to be successful.
But it's interesting you bring that up, because obviously I think we would always get caught up in like the practical day to day, right? And there is the practical day to day. There's the personal projects. There's the community service projects in the MYP. There's all the DP stuff that kind of comes in with it as well. So I think that's always going to be there. And I guess we're going to be talking a little bit about leadership here. So when we talk about like leading in the school, something like cognitive coaching can be extremely powerful. Like everybody who takes on that coaching approach, it makes a difference in their relationships with their colleagues. It makes a difference in their relationships with their students. It changes the way they teach. So how do you kind of like navigate the philosophy? Like if we embed this, it will make a big difference to everything else, while also recognizing, yeah, I know we got stuff to do, but that's always going to be there. And if we don't do this important thing, then we're not going to see a massive change that we want to see.
Right. Maybe not in a MYP accreditation period, but I can't imagine there's ever a time where the teachers are like, I've got nothing to do. Yeah. Let's do this.
Yeah.
I think that listening to teachers is a really, really important part of being a leader, because you can't lead people who don't want to follow you. And so you need to build that trust and you need to build that relationship. I think that often in schools, there's too much change for change's sake. And I think that leaders really need to keep in touch with their teachers to understand when they can push, when they need to say, okay, we're going to slow down, we're going to support you through this. Mm-hmm. And I think that change that is planned and well thought out is much more likely to be successful. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes schools make a mistake. They have this great idea. A new administrator comes in. They've got this great initiative, and then when that administrator leaves, the initiative disappears.
Right.
And I think that happens because implementation is the most difficult part of change. Getting people on board, getting people excited about moving forward and what it can look like. Yeah. So I think that I think there has to be this symbiotic relationship between school leaders and teachers.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say to you, I really believe they are the experts in the school. They are the ones that really know what's going on.
So you got to empathize with like what's going on in that particular time frame. So like, okay, if you want to bring in some good change, you want to try something new in the school, like don't do it during IA season or exams or something like this. It's basically like if it doesn't happen before Christmas, like it's not happening, right?
Yeah, and I think too, you need to have like a 2 or 3 year plan.
Right.
Like you can't start at a new school and think, oh, I'm going to start cognitive coaching next week. It's just not going to work.
Yeah.
And I think that schools don't really, I think schools do have long-term strategic plans, but I think that sometimes they see it like a shining object on the beach. Oh, we want to do this and we want to try and force this into the strategic plan. And I really think that good change is really well-planned change.
Yeah. And I think like taking the time with it for me in my role, when I understood like if I want to make some sort of change here, you really have to, as you say, plan it, but expect, we would say 3 to 5 years before it's like fully bought up and embedded. And I think even just that mindset shift, like I'm an achiever. I got to get stuff done, and I really want to like push through things all the time. And just that sort of mindset shift of this is going to take some time, so be intentional about it. Really like walk it through. I think made a big difference to the way that we approach like all of our big projects, and it also made us a little bit more discerning about like which project to do when.
Which projects to win. I love that. I love that. Yeah, that's a really good one. John, have you put something in place in your school that's been really exciting?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up the coaching aspect. It's something that like we brought up sort of the idea of cognitive coaching about a year and a half ago within our extended SLT. And that was basically like, working through some different coaching ideas, kind of working with coaching concepts. And now it's just like we're starting to roll that a little bit more into other members of staff and trying to, get more people trained up in this idea. So it's interesting you brought that up right away, because I was like, that's exactly what we're doing here. Because again, you see it as such a powerful tool that enhances every single thing you do. But yeah, it's again, that project of like, we just need to take some time on this and recognize that everybody is already kind of idling at 80, like we've already got a lot going on. So just like little bits, let's just little bit drip this every so often, remind people about it, and then take the time that it needs.
I think cognitive coaching is a really good example of something that needs time, because the training is the most important part. It's a really, really difficult skill. And it also requires a lot of trust, because you're inviting other teachers into your classroom. They're going to critique you. That's difficult in some schools, to be able to create that culture of openness, of reflection, of tell me what you think, even if it's, even if I don't necessarily want to hear it. And I love the fact that you're talking about taking years to develop cognitive coaching, because it's this whole new, it really is a whole new school culture that you've got to envelop.
I think that it's really interesting when you talk about that, because you've gone in 2 different directions when you were joining as a leader, and you started as a teacher and then kind of moved your way up, and that you really already have the trust buy-in at the school, because you already know everybody and they've kind of seen your progression. So they are hopefully, and I'm assuming, yes, cheering for you as you kind of move up into this leadership position. But then, for example, in other schools, you've kind of just come in as, none of you know me, but now I'm principal, or now I'm the head of the school. And how have you treated that differently?
I think that there's an advantage when you come in as a teacher and then you move up. You understand the school culture. So you understand what are the sacred cows. You understand that when you get into a staff meeting, what you can say in order to persuade people. Right. You already know the skill set of the people around you, and you already know how to leverage that. So there's a lot of advantages. But then on the other hand, when you've been a teacher there, people kind of think, well, how are you an expert? How do you know anything about cognitive coaching or whatever it is? So that's a challenge. So I think when you come in as principal, you come in as head of school, people don't know who you are. You're a mystery, and you can come in looking like the expert on high. Fantastic. Yeah. And then, put your foot in it on the first day or something like that.
Sure. But I would imagine, like in that situation, you really have to kind of check yourself as that leader, being like, I don't want to just come in and like reframe things immediately. I got to kind of get a lay of the land and figure things out first before I really start to bring out my initiatives or the things that I want to do. And I would guess there's probably got to be pressure from, for example, your board of directors or whoever's kind of like, yeah, we brought you here because we want to see some things. Like, how do you navigate that idea of, I want to push, I want to get some new stuff going on here, but I need to figure out what's going on the ground. Like, it seems like a really tricky thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is my advice to any new administrator walking into a school, whether you're vice principal or head of school or whatever, is to start with an appreciative inquiry.
Yeah.
Is to go around and search in the school for all the strengths, to search for the strengths of teachers, the strengths of systems, of operations, of HR, all those things, and then present that to the board. This is who we are. This is what we're really great at. Present it to the teachers, to the parents.
Yeah.
And then you get everybody on board, and then you use those strengths in order to be able to move the school forward. So you're saying, this is a great school. I'm so glad to be here. This is all the reasons why. This is what I've uncovered about why this is the best school that, I could possibly be in. And we're going to use those strengths. We're going to use all the things that we're really, really good at in order to move in this direction and then move forward with your strategic plan. Because you find out a lot about the school, you find out the strengths of the school, and you develop that relationship, that trust as well. So, yeah, that would be my advice.
That sort of that strengthening strengths concept. I mean, we see it in like triathlon athletes. We see it in all sorts of athletes. It was just like, yeah, take the thing that you're already doing relatively well and let's work on that quite a bit. And that doesn't mean like, oh, we're just going to completely ignore all the other gaps, but it just means like, let's focus on the stuff we're doing well for a little bit. And then other things will be able to kind of fill in the gaps there too.
Well, use those skills to improve the things you're not very good at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This episode's CogTip is submitted by Claudia Gonima from the Colegio Colombo Británico. Claudia says, I love that I can ask my students to read in advance and therefore have questions, and they are ready to do activities in class regarding their readings. It helps me make the most out of the time I have for more collaboration. Thanks, Claudia. I think we're warmed up. Let's go into EURs.
Yeah, that was the short warm-up round. I think we're all good.
No, this is fantastic. I'm great. I'm so happy to have you here. And I think that you've done quite a few leadership sessions with us in the past. And I know that what we've gotten some feedback on in the past is you've had this great way of making it feel very a practical approach, a very pragmatic way of leading, but also with a lot of heart and a lot of care. And I think that comes through whenever you're talking about leadership. So I think we could do this all day, but we're not going to. We're going to jump into EURs. And so I want to get started by just giving a bit of a brief overview for maybe schools and teachers that haven't been working with this as much, or maybe it's not really a deliberate policy that they've set in their school, a bit one-off. If you could give a bit of an overview of them, the different categories.
Yeah, so you can use the EURs in two ways. So first of all, when you get your IB results, you might see that a certain student is within 1 or 2 marks of a grade boundary. If only they had 1 or 2 more marks, they could move into the next grade. How fantastic. And what you can do is that you can talk to the parents and you can suggest that they get the IB paper remarked, an EUR, Enquiry Upon Results. The second way in which a school can use EURs, and I'm interested, John, as a DP coordinator, if I wonder if you do this at your school, actually, is that you can actually buy back your exam papers from the IB. And what you can do is you can give those to teachers to help them improve their teaching and learning. And I think that is a really, really powerful way to improve teaching and learning. So this is what I suggest, is that if you're a teacher, if you're an economics teacher or a chemistry teacher, you look at your IB results, and your IB results are broken down according to components, paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, the internal assessment. And what you can do is you can have a look at your components and you can look at the weakest one. What was the weakest one? And then you can go to your IB coordinator in around August or September and say, can you please buy the EURs, the exam papers for paper 2 chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you can do is that you can go to your teaching team and you can say, we've got the papers. And so the papers that you get are graded and it's got the examiner comments. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, I don't find the examiner comments particularly useful. And I hear that.
This is where I wanted to get into this with you as well. Sometimes we'll get those papers back as well, and we'll take a look. Now, I'm also an examiner for the IB for biology, and so I know, like from the examiner side, it's like put the tick marks where they are, like associate it with the mark scheme, add in commentary if necessary, but you're not obligated to, and just sort of recognize that everything that you're putting on that paper can be viewed by the school. And then like when we pull those in and we take a look at them, sometimes you just see the tick marks and you don't even know like where in the mark scheme does this relate to. So I'm interested to know like what are some of the better ways that you can pull out usefulness from, for example, buying back the papers?
That's a great question. So if you have a look at my slides, I'll give you an example. Mm-hmm. So let's say that extended essays. So let's say that you buy back your extended essays and you have a look at your component grades. And so if you can see from the slide, you can see that there's a student that got almost full marks and then the whole range right down to the bottom. So what you could do is in your team say, okay, we're going to look at criteria A.
Right.
Examiner hasn't written marks that are particularly useful.
Mm-hmm.
Often, as an examiner, what you do is you explain why something is in a mark scheme, why something's in a mark band, and you don't explain how the student can improve. And I think that's why, as teachers, we feel a little bit frustrated. Mm-hmm. So, but what it does tell you is what mark the kid got. So if you have a look at the next slide, it talks about what you could actually look for. So say you're going to look at criteria A. So what you're going to do is you're going to go through the mark band and you're going to look at exactly what the student needed to do. So have a look for the purpose. You know, how did the student demonstrate their purpose? And have a look at the kid that got the top mark. So what you do is you go through the mark band and you actually look for, annotate the paper, look for where the kid managed to state their purpose, to state
what they're doing, and
you can see on the slide, right?
Yeah, well, and I can see where this would work really well with, I think, especially like an extended essay or the IAs, for example. You know, because you've got a little bit more control as a teacher, and you say, okay, here are the criteria that we're trying to assess. So I need to know these things. So you kind of know a little bit more. It's like you don't really need the mark instructions because you were given the criteria, so you could kind of work through it kind of backward in that respect. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But you could do it with exam papers as well. So, for instance, in economics, I would definitely choose paper 2. I think that's the most challenging paper. And paper 2 is broken up into different parts. So part A is always definitions. So what you do is you take all your exam papers and you look at all the definitions from every kid. Why did this kid get 2? Why did this kid get 1? Why did this kid get 0? And understand exactly what the examiner is looking for. And then have a look at the diagram question. Have a look at the diagram question for every single kid. Why did this kid get 4 marks? Why did this kid get 2 marks? And so on. And what we've got is generalized mark band. So we may not necessarily have the mark scheme, but we do have the mark band. So we can actually have a look. And this is what I suggest is that when you're able to actually have a look at the student work and analyze, what does it look like to get 4 marks on this question? And then go down the line and have a look at kids as they, as it dissembles down into lower and lower marks.
Sure.
And then have that conversation. What could this kid have done in order to improve? How could we have moved this kid from 5 out of 6 on criteria A for the extended essay to 6 out of 6? And from that, with your colleagues, talk about some different teaching strategies that you could use in order to get there. And I think that's a really powerful way, because often we focus on our teaching. We focus on what we're saying in the classroom, how we explain something in the classroom. And I think when we start by looking at the exam papers, we're doing the exact opposite. We're actually looking at student learning.
Right.
And we're saying, what's the outcome? of all our teaching. This is what we've created. This is the learning. And being able to look at all those exam papers and comparing it to the criteria is a really powerful way to understand how to help students improve.
I love it. I'm just sort of chuckling a little bit inside because it's like, as a teacher, sometimes you give the exams back to your students and they just look at the results and they're like, they throw it away. And you're like, no, take some time and learn from it and all this sort of stuff. And effectively what you just said is the same thing for teachers, right? Like we sometimes will get the results back. And so often you'll hear like the immediate response being like, well, I don't understand why they marked us down. They were just really unfair this year. And then that's kind of it. And what I love what you're saying here is like, invest the time to go through it. And like what you just described, like that's going to be a big amount of time, but you can see the learning that's going to come from that and the ways that teaching can shift once you've taken the time to, I'm going to look through this paper, I'm going to compare it to the mark band, I am going to take the time to really find out where those marks were associated. So what I'm hearing is like sometime in that like October time or something like this, when those come back, really take the time to reinvest in that cohort and understand a little bit more about what went well, what didn't work so well. And I think for many people, like depending on the process of where they are in their IAs, for example, or their exam prep, they might think, oh, but this, I've already done the IA, I can't do this. But it's like that continual process is going to benefit so many other students down the road, right?
Absolutely. And I think as teachers, we want to teach more effectively. We want our kids to do well in the exam. And if we can find a strategy to improve our exam scores, I think that's something that we're really excited about.
Yeah, no, and I love the idea of also having the examples that are from your own students as opposed to just looking at the ones that the IB gives everybody.
Right.
It's like then you actually have a bit more context and you understand probably where the student was coming from when they wrote it, because you're like, yeah, I remember you thought that way. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so you can have definitely a stronger learning of what you could do differently going forward. So I do like that. And I think that probably you guys would know much better than me, but usually when you're thinking about sending these papers in, you're thinking about the students of those actual papers, not the future students, and really using that as professional learning for your teachers. I think that's fantastic. Do you do that in a standardized way, or is it a bit more teacher initiated for you?
One thing that stuck with me from what you just said, Courtney, is like you have to have a positionality of being a learner, like as a teacher. And I think so often like you care a ton about your kids, and so therefore you market a certain way and you're like, they have earned all this stuff. I watched this process. I watched them grow through this. So like they should get this mark. And then when it comes back and it's been moderated down, you get defensive. It's like there's a part, it's not just you and your marking. It's like, but you don't understand this person and what they've gone through. And so when I lead workshops on the IA, for example, I have teachers coming into these workshops just angry, like they're just mad, And I get it. Like I've been in the same shoes because you care so much about the kids. You want them to do well, and so it's like you need justification. What happened here? But really, what you're suggesting, and I think what we're discussing here, is like, as teachers, we really need to take on that position of learner. Like when the results come in, like I'm not going to necessarily change these results now. We may have done the EUR Cat 2 right at the start, or the Cat 1 EUR, and just said, all right, get these remarked. But once that's definitively marked, we're not changing that. So we have to take that position of what am I learning from this? And I think it's almost like you got to check your ego at the door for a moment and just come in and be like, what am I going to learn? How can I improve? Let me set what I know about this student aside for just a moment to understand, like, how was this interpreted and where was my bias in place and how can I push my bias aside, right?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And you're looking at your own teaching, essentially. When you're looking at the exam papers, you're seeing the results of your own teaching. Mm-hmm. Did I explain this very well? Mm-hmm. Did I explain to the kids how to answer it in the exam? The exam skills that they need? Those things are really important. And how do you know if you're doing it correctly unless you actually look at the exam papers?
Right. Mm-hmm. It's the evidence there that helps you out a ton.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Courtney, you asked a great question about, is this something that could be done systematically? So you could do it as an individual teacher. You can go and say to your DP coordinator, can you please buy the EURs for me? Hopefully your DP coordinator will say yes. And what if you're the only teacher in your school, in your subject area? What do you do then? Mm-hmm. So you could reach out to nearby schools
Mm-hmm.
Some schools like Indonesia have a really brilliant regional network called Dunia. That's a really good thing to do. Be really fun to do it, through Zoom or something like that. Absolutely.
I mean, we've got one like in Europe, there's the Association of Central European IB Schools, for example, or ACES. And I know there's lots of other organizations like that where it's like a conglomerate of schools to do exactly what you just said, like where, I'm the only global politics teacher in my school, but I would love to talk with some people about this and see how it works. And so, hopefully, for any listeners right now, like you've got those networks and you're involved in them and you can kind of connect, because that's a really great way to learn from the process. You don't necessarily have to share your results right away, but you can learn from the process, and that can be a useful thing there too.
Absolutely.
So from our standpoint with regard to the EURs, like it's very much sort of student led, especially for the Cat 1, like remarking kind of thing. And then it's basically just on the teachers and the departments to say like, oh, we want these back, but in my role as a coordinator, and I know there's some schools who will just like blanketly do it. They'll just be like, right, we're going to get all these remarked. We're going to do these EURs here. We're going to get all this stuff back. And they just kind of set aside a big part of their budget for that. Just say, we're going to do those things. In your opinion, which one's kind of like the most effective when we're talking about school improvement? Like, let's say a school wants to improve not just their scores, but they want to improve the whole diploma program itself. Is it best to just kind of take that like top-down approach of like, we're just going to do all these? Or is it best to kind of build up that autonomy and say like, you as the teacher, you have a little bit more control if you want this, if you don't? Recognizing the risk could be that they don't do it.
Yeah, I think that using the EURs are a really powerful way to improve teaching and learning. And I think that, if you're an administrator, a DP coordinator, and as a pedagogical leader, this is a really powerful tool. And I'm sure that you probably have something a similar kind of thing happening in your school. But what you could do as the DP coordinator or the vice principal or the principal is to actually say, okay, DP coordinator, please look at all the results, blanket by the component that's got the lowest score. Sure. And then actually have a systematic process by which you do it. And I think the most important thing to start off with is actually with training and saying to teachers, this is why we do it. This is why we want to do it, because we want to improve teaching and learning in our school. And then talk about the process. And I think that the next thing you want to do is get teachers together in common subject areas and actually get them starting off with creating norms, because as you said, it's very, very difficult to look at your exam papers and then all of a sudden you've got all your colleagues looking over your shoulder at your exam papers. You're going to have some difficult conversations. And so the norms are Ganstom's norms are a really, really powerful way to be able to establish a way in which people can talk to one another. Always assume best intent. I think that's my favorite norm. So whenever someone says something, it's like, but no, they meant it in a good way. So I think that's really important. So creating norms, and then take those exam papers, look at them question by question and analyze those exams and look for teaching strengths. That's really, really important. And teaching weaknesses as well. So across all of these papers, where do students do the best? Do they do the best in definitions, in evaluation? Do they do the best in part G of paper 2? Do we have really good real-world examples across all of our exam papers? Do we not? And then get your teachers to create a SMART goal in order to be able to plan what they're going to improve. And then the accountability is really important. And you mentioned that. How do you know when teachers close that classroom door that meeting is going to happen? And how can you create that accountability? So you could say, okay, you've created your SMART goal. So we're going to ensure that 80% of our students get 6 out of 6 on criteria A for the extended essay, and ask them to share it in a Google Doc. And next head of department meeting, you have a look at the Google Doc and have a look at all the SMART goals. The next thing that I suggest is then set up a second department meeting. They've got their SMART goal. They know what they need to do. Okay, we're going to improve evaluation. And then develop teaching strategies, and in particular, create a lesson plan. Create a lesson plan for that teaching strategy. So, for example, let's say that you need to improve evaluation. So Trump's got some pretty exciting tariffs going on right now. Maybe you could design a lesson together evaluating those tariffs. To what extent are they a good idea? And I'm sure you've heard about this, the Japanese lesson study. So once you've created the lesson, you ask one of the teachers in the team to teach the lesson. Their colleagues watch the lesson, and then afterwards they meet again and actually critique, not the teacher, but they critique the lesson. So to what extent do students improve their understanding or improve their skill of evaluation from this lesson? And that's a really exciting discussion.
I was just going to say, it's like that collaborative reflection, right? So it's not just reflecting on your own thing, but it's like, let me invite some other colleagues, some trusted people into this conversation as well and reflect on the things that we were aiming for, right?
Exactly. It's quite different to cognitive coaching because that's all about trying to get the teacher to reflect. This is a little bit different because you're actually critiquing the lesson plan and you're actually ignoring the skills of the teacher. So it's actually something quite different. And then once you get some feedback on that, you could tweak the lesson, and then another teacher in the group teaches the lesson to their class, and then everybody watches it and critiques. And then the accountability piece, that's really, really important. So again, DP coordinator, vice principal could set up a Google sheet or a Google folder and submit your lesson plan in here. Submit, minutes from your meeting where you discuss your lesson plan. Maybe you could have, if you have really strong groups, you could invite them into a school-wide meeting and have them present what they did. I think what's really exciting is just talking about teaching and learning and focusing on student work and using that student work in order to be able to determine teaching strategies and evaluating those strategies and tweaking them.
Something I really love about this, in a different episode, we were talking about with the ATLs, the idea of having a safe space for failing. And we were talking about it a lot for the students. How do you create a space where they feel comfortable with failure and building that resilience? And I think that this really puts it into the teacher space of what Lance, our other guest, was saying was there's this idea where you succeed, you fail well, or you fail poorly. And this is really about that failing well place. It's I'm comfortable saying my students didn't do well on this part of the exam, but it's going to be worth it because now I'm going to become a better teacher for it. And I think that part of that has to come from the teacher, but a lot of that also has to come from administration, where the administrators and the school culture creates a space where you can fail well as a teacher and come with the humility and be able to put the ego aside. That is difficult, especially when there's too much, or I should say so much pressure on grades and the teachers feeling like the teacher grade equals my performance.
Right.
And being able to separate that and be able to say, yeah, they didn't score as well as I thought I did, but I'm going to do something about it. And this really gives them a way to do that in a safe space, especially if the school is celebrating that kind of learning for the teachers too.
Yeah, and I think that's the key part. Like, as you were talking about, okay, let's have the accountability piece. Let's get some shared folders going on, that sort of thing. In the back of my head, I was like, and make sure that that's not the end of it. Like, you've got to, as you said, like put it in a staff meeting or something like that, call it out. And again, come back to like, here are the strengths, and let's talk about our strengths again. Do something with it. Don't just hold it. Because of course, that's going to create a bunch of like uncertainty. Like, what's happening with all that work I just did? Okay, you're doing this process. You're getting like EURs coming in. You're thinking through the results themselves. How are they working? How are they going to improve our teaching and learning? But at the same time, that's more on a year's time frame, right? Like, let's say I'm looking at the results of class of 24, for example, and I'm preparing for the class of 25. But in all reality, they may have already gone through some of like their IAs or their extended essays are kind of done. So really, I'm kind of focusing on the class of 26. From a teacher lens, it's like I can think about this a little bit wider. But how then, especially from a leadership role, how do you manage these expectations that are coming in from the student in that moment, from the parents in that moment? They're looking at like, how have we done? What's going to move forward? Like, how do you balance this? Like, we're doing a long-term improvement that will ultimately affect your child. But, like in the back of your head, you're like, this is going to be a longer term sort of thing. And it may not directly affect the student who's graduating this year.
Parents need to have trust in the school and they need to have trust in the teachers. And I think that if parents understand that teachers are working on improving, it's February right now. And right now, if you're teaching the second year of IB, you're getting your kids ready for exams. You're getting them ready for those exam skills. And I think that those EURs that you got in September would actually be really helpful for those exam skills to actually prepare them. So I think you can say to parents, yeah, we're working really hard with these EURs, and they're definitely going to help your kids this year.
So it's investing the time early, that sort of September, October, putting together the particular skills. And then, as you say, like, let's build a lesson plan around this. Let's evaluate the lesson. Let's kind of work through like, how are we actually working on those particular skills? And then now, once you get into this couple months before the exams, it's okay. Now let's pinpoint, these are the specific skills that we're good at, that we're strong at. And here are the ways where we kind of miss the mark in other spaces where we can really improve that now. Is that kind of a nice summary of what you were discussing?
That's a wonderful summary.
Okay.
Are you an IB educator wanting to improve your practice and needing just a bit more support getting there? Have you ever wanted to learn more about a specific aspect of the DP program or ask a question to an educational theorist about a specific IB aspect? IB Unplugged is the place for you. Simply visit cognity.com/IB Unplugged to submit your question to us and have your question explored in more detail in an upcoming episode. And now, back to the show. We talked a lot about the category two parts there with the teaching and learning. Category 1 is about the specific student.
Like a remark of their work.
Remarking, exactly. When you're doing that at your school, Jen, do you have like a standardized way or like a really good way of communicating this with parents? Because I'd imagine that usually if there's a remark, there's a upset student and therefore an upset parent. In a lot of cases where they feel like they didn't get the grade that they deserved, and that's why you're sending it back. Is there anything that you feel like you've been handling really well in these dialogues at your school?
Yeah, I think that parent communication is actually really important. Parents need to have a really good idea of a realistic IB score. And that for a school, I think, is quite difficult because kids take tests, teachers mark tests, they've just completed the topic, are marking the test, and then they make all these semester grades, which they communicate to parents. And then all of a sudden you have this very, very different situation where these kids take these exams all at the same time based upon 2 years of work, something they've never thought about for 18 months. And those grades, based upon this high stress exam situation, is supposed to be exactly the same of all these classroom experiences. I mean, it's really, really difficult. I think it takes a lot of skill for a teacher to be able to create grades that align with what kids are going to do in their IB exams. But it's so important.
Yeah. That predicted grade bit is just so impossible in some cases. Like, how is this kid going to feel? How are they going to perform at the moment? Like, how am I going to get a realistic view of this? It's a brutal one. And as you said, like, then you're managing that expectation of the parents as well, who are saying, well, they've always achieved 6s in your class. They've always achieved 7s. So suddenly they pull a 5. What's going on here?
What's going on? Yeah. So I think that communication has to be very, very clear with parents. And there's a couple of things as well. So I encourage teachers, stronger word than encourage, teachers to communicate with parents. So if a kid has a test and they get less than a C or less than a 4th, they get a 3 on the test, they need to email parents straight away, inform them. Mm-hmm. And a really nice way to email parents is where you say, this is where your kid is. This is what we're going to do in order to improve. Mm-hmm. And so that parents get that information straight away. And I've seen DP coordinators as well. What they do is at the end of every assessment period, every term or every semester, they'll go through Manage Back, and they will invite parents in if kids have got an IB score lower than 24, or they've got a higher level, 3 or below, or whatever, and start having those conversations. So those conversations are happening before the IB scores come out.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that parents realise that you really care about their kids' score, and that as a school, you're being super proactive about trying to help them get the very best score that you can. And that's a really important part of your school culture for kids and for parents. So then when it does happen, as sometimes it does, that the IB score doesn't align with what the parent expectations are, you're going to have a much more supportive parent body, and that's really, really important, because our job as administrators is to protect our teachers.
Yeah.
And it's our job to stand in the middle and have those difficult conversations.
I was just gonna say, it sounds like you're building up like the trust though throughout that. Like when you do those little check-ins all the way through. And what I really liked about what you said is it's not just communicating your student got, or your child got a 3 or a 4. It's, and here's what we're gonna do. And I think that's an element that is sometimes missed in that like home communication. So often when we communicate home, we're just like, want to keep you in the loop. So far, like your child's not meeting the requirements to pass the IB. And then it's like, that's it.
Yeah.
And so,
and the parents like, well, what am I supposed to do? I don't know anything about DP chemistry.
yeah. So you got to, following up with like, here's the actionable things. Here's the specific stuff we're going to do with it. And then just as you say, it builds confidence in the teacher, it builds trust in the school, and it builds trust in you as the educational professional, so that, when the results come in a little bit odd, it's a softer blow, I guess.
Absolutely. So there's another thing. I've never done this at my school. I'm wondering if you've done this at your school, John, but this is another, a really interesting way to get that feedback loop. And it's about opening up that discussion between students and teachers. So what you can do is you can have a staff meeting, and you can invite some students in and have 3 students sit at a table with 8 teachers. And there's a set of questions that the teachers can ask, such as, tell me about a teaching strategy, or tell me about something that happened in your classroom that really helped your learning, or tell me about a situation where you really didn't understand a concept and a teacher really helped you out. Those sorts of questions. And I think that's a really interesting way to get information out of kids and how they're feeling. Yeah. And I think where I've seen it done, what happens is that you ask for student volunteers, mm-hmm. and then you train them. You tell them, we really want feedback from you. We really want to hear from you. So we're going to have a staff meeting. Here are the questions that we're going to ask you. Is there any questions that we shouldn't ask? Are there any questions we should add on? And then give kids an opportunity to practice how they would answer those questions, mm-hmm. and then have the staff meeting and inform teachers, stick to the questions, because these kids are going to feel attacked.
Right.
If you start asking questions like, well, why is my teaching no good?
Yeah. We honestly do it at Cognity. I've interviewed a lot of students actually about their experiences in Cognity, and I can say that I think it's really a testament to the diploma program of they're so wise in their answers.
Oh, don't give them that much credit.
I know, I am. They're so self-critical, so in a positive way, like reflective. They can really think about, they'll tell you what parts of the platform they find value and when and why. And they'll be like, even simple things like, I prefer doing this on Cognity because I read for a small amount of time, and then by the time that I'm ready to check my phone because I got bored, I have a video to watch instead. There's these ideas of like, I know what I need and what I'm getting, and I do think that they really have that ability to give feedback.
So, when we think about like the conversation we've had, which has been absolutely incredible, but let's say like you're a listener and you just want to kind of get like the last little bits here, like what are the key things that I can do right now? Let's say I'm a leader in my school, whether I'm a DP coordinator, I'm a middle leader, I'm a head of school. What are some very simple, actionable ways that school leaders can really drive that inspiration and that growth in a school that they could put into action like right away?
I think definitely start with appreciative inquiry. Definitely look for the strengths of your school. Look for great things that are happening in classrooms, great things that are happening operationally, what's happening in the lunchroom that's fantastic. Is there after school programs that kids are really excited about? Is it a growing program? Is it kind of dying? Kids aren't interested. Look for the very best things that your school has. And this is the other thing, is that I think it's really, really important to centre schools on this idea that teachers are the experts. Mm-hmm. So why not? Why not get in touch with those teachers who are doing something really fabulous and invite them to a head of departments meeting? The last 15 minutes of every head of departments meeting, you invite in a different skills specialist in the school, mm-hmm. maybe someone who's got a fantastic after school club. Why do kids want to come to your club? What is it that you're doing in your club that's really successful? Find a teacher where the kids rave about. Invite them into your HOD meeting. Why are kids really enjoying your classroom? What are you doing? Mm-hmm. And then take those ideas and distill them back to teachers. And every once in a while in a school-wide meeting, invite people to come up and speak and share their best practice. In this way, because quite often schools are top down, decisions are made, and I think quite often teachers feel like, here's another initiative, here's something else that's going on. And I think the best schools that are passionate about changing teaching and learning are driven by the best practices from teachers. If you've already got fantastic teachers in your school, why not celebrate that? Why not take those skills and diffuse them amongst the rest of your staff? Mm-hmm. And I think that schools, especially international schools, they are like a melting pot of incredible practice and incredible skills. Yeah, and that's something we should celebrate as international mm-hmm. schools.
I like that. All right. So appreciative inquiry, right? Let's go and see what's going on. And then let's trust our teachers. They're the experts. Let's give them some chances to kind of showcase what makes things work really well and then distribute that across everybody. That's what I love about that. Is pretty simple. It's really actionable. And of course, like if you're that administrator, if you're that school leader, it's carving the time for it. You're always going to get those messages from parents. You're always going to get that stuff from the board, and you're going to have to manage the budget and that sort of thing. And that's important, obviously.
Yeah.
And set it to specific timings so that you can prioritize this as well, right?
It's absolutely about building school culture. School culture is what makes things happen. And if you can build that positive school culture where teachers feel that they are the center of the school and they drive changes in teaching and learning, you will have a fantastic school.
Great. I mean, thank you so much, Jen. This has been a fantastic conversation. I think it is so great to have the balance between, okay, now I have a lot of nice ideas of things that I can do, but also taking some time to think about it kind of in a broader sense. So it's been a pleasure, as always, to meet with you. And yeah, I hope we can talk again soon.
I have loved this. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jen. It was a lot of fun. Really appreciate it. And wish you well.
Thanks.
IB Unplugged is a Cognity podcast hosted by John Patton and Courtney Marlene and produced by Catalina Gaffney. Be sure to subscribe or follow and share with your fellow IB educators. If you'd like to submit a topic, request, or question, please do so on cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Let's keep the conversation going and support each other in teaching with confidence, creativity, and joy. See you next time.